Alright, so today I want to introduce you to the pumpkin pied ball python. The pumpkin pied actually consists of two genes, the pied and the yellow belly. And the pied is a recessive mutation bringing in big patches of white on the snake. And the yellow belly works really well with the pied. Essentially what it does is it really brings out a lot of orange, like a pumpkin orange in your pieds. It makes for some really impressive flashy pied combinations. And kind of the other interesting thing between the two genes is the yellow belly also kind of disrupts the pattern. The edges of the pattern between the darker parts of the snake and the white parts of the snake are usually a lot more jagged when you add yellow belly to the mix. Usually you can definitely tell when you add yellow belly to a pied to make a pumpkin pied. So today I want to jump over to the internet and I want to show you the potential of the pumpkin pied ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with the two genes that make up the pumpkin pied. And the first one I want to show you is just the pied by itself without the yellow belly. This is what a pied looks like. And kind of the interesting thing about pied is sometimes it can have a lot of white, a really high white pied, and sometimes it can have a really low white, like almost hardly any white at all. And usually if it's a really low white pied, usually the white is just on the tail. And most of the color I'd say on most pieds is up towards the head in most cases. You won't really see a pied with like a white head or something like that. It's kind of rare. You can actually do it with something maybe like a Russo pied to force a high white pied, and you can also force a low white pied by using Enchi. But I'd say usually just pied by itself can be really variable. And some people say that you really can't line breed for a high white pied or a low white pied. You start with two pieds, it doesn't matter if they're high white or low white, and you breed them together and you get a whole variety of high whites and low whites, which is kind of interesting. And if you actually take a look at the difference between the colored part and the white part of the snake, kind of the edge right here, you can see it's a little bit jagged as far as the edge, but it's not as jagged, not as rugged as you would see in a pumpkin pied. So I wanted to show you a yellow belly over here. This is what a yellow belly looks like, and I'd say a yellow belly just by itself looks really close to a normal ball python. It's a really subtle morph, and some people can pick out the kind of the subtle markers of a yellow belly. Usually the number one marker on a yellow belly is on either side of the belly. It kind of has a jumbled up, almost like a pixelated pattern on either side of the belly. And a lot of times the belly's not yellow on a yellow belly. I'd say probably in most cases it doesn't have a yellow belly, so you really can't look at the color of the belly. And usually it has kind of flames, like these white little flames coming up the sides between the pattern. That's kind of an indication of yellow belly too. So if you actually take a yellow belly and work it into the recessive pied, this is what you get. You get a pumpkin pied. Take a look at this. You get a pied that has kind of like a pumpkin orange color on the pied. And kind of the interesting thing with the pumpkin pied is I've noticed a lot of the hatchlings are super bright orange like this, and a lot of times they'll really kind of fade out as they age and mature. As a matter of fact, I actually bought a fire pied, a pyro pied, and it was super bright as a hatchling, and the older it got, the more it just kind of faded out, which is kind of a bummer. Sometimes you can mix certain genes together and really keep a really bright pied with the yellow belly in there. But if you actually take a look at kind of the outline of the pattern on these, you can definitely tell it's a lot more jagged right along the edge. And if you actually go back to the pied and look at this, you can see it's a little bit jagged. You kind of have to have a keen eye as far as kind of, you know, the differences in the pattern, but this one is not quite as jagged as this one over here. And you can definitely tell this one's a lot more orange than a regular pied. If you kind of know what you're looking for, it's pretty obvious picking out the yellow belly pieds from the regular pieds. And kind of the challenging part of this project is if you actually took two pumpkin pieds and you bred them together, you could potentially get an ivory pied, which is the super yellow belly. And I actually pulled one up here. Take a look at this. This is kind of crazy. This is the super yellow belly pied, also known as the ivory pied. So the super yellow belly is an all-white snake with really dark eyes. Some people say that their yellow bellies have black eyes. Some people say it's a really dark blue, which is kind of interesting. It's not really, it's not a true blue-eyed leucistic snake. And a lot of times the ivories will be kind of dirty a little bit. You'll have kind of a little pixelation right down the snake. And usually the ivories have kind of a gray head. You can definitely see on this one. This is probably one of the best ivories I've seen with a really super white background. It's pretty awesome. And kind of the weird thing about the ivory is being a white snake, usually it masks all the other genes underneath the the white snake, it's kind of the same way with the blue-eyed leucistics. Once you make the white snake, you can bury a lot of other genes in there. And a lot of people will say this is an ivory, possible, you know, 10 other genes in the ivory because you really can't see them. But there is one gene that will really break through the ivory, and that is leopard. And usually if you have leopard in an ivory, it'll also bring out all the other genes to a lesser extent along with the leopard, which is kind of an interesting effect. So take a look at this. I actually pulled up an ivory pied with the leopard in there. Take a look at this. So this has leopard in an ivory, a super yellow belly. And essentially what that does is it pulls out all the color from the leopard, and it also pulls out the color from the other genes underneath. So in this case, you can definitely see that it's pulling out the color, and you can definitely see that the pied is in the mix with the leopard ivory pied. Kind of an interesting effect. So speaking of leopard, this is actually what a leopard looks like. A leopard is really a pattern mutation, really jumbles up the pattern. And the leopard's kind of a pseudo dark morph. If you mix it with dark genes, a lot of times it'll actually bring out a lot more of the dark, kind of almost like an inkjet black in a lot of cases. And if you mix it with a lot of light genes, like the bananas or the coraglows, sometimes it won't really darken the snake. So it's kind of a transition between the light snakes and the dark snakes. And here's what happens if you work leopard into a pumpkin pied. Take a look at this crazy snake. Sometimes I've actually seen a lot of people working leopards into pieds, and a lot of times I'd say it's really difficult to pick out the leopard. A lot of people say this is possible leopard because usually with the pied you get a really jumbled up pattern without any other genes in the mix. So if you try to mix in like leopard or GHI or some of the genes that really jumble up the pattern, sometimes it's actually hard to pick them out. But in this case, you see the background is really dark working in leopard, so you definitely know it's in there, and you can definitely see it jumbles it up a little bit more than just a regular pied. You can definitely see the leopard is in the mix in this one. So take a look at this. This is actually the Freeway, which is, it's an allelic combination. And this is actually a combination of the yellow belly and the asphalt. So the kind of the tricky part of this is if you actually take a Freeway and you breed it to a normal, you'll get half yellow bellies and half asphalts. And the asphalts and yellow bellies almost look exactly the same. I have yet to find anyone that can tell the difference between an asphalt and the yellow belly. And it's kind of interesting if you work this into the pumpkin pied, because keep in mind that the pumpkin pied contains yellow bellies. So if you're actually to take a pumpkin pied and you bred it to an asphalt pied, you would actually get a Freeway pied. So take a look at this. This is what a Freeway pied looks like. This is pretty crazy. Essentially what it is, it's a pied with this line right down the top. Kind of an unexpected combination, working the Freeway into the pied. This one also has Pastel in the mix, which probably brings out a little more of the yellow. But essentially what this is an asphalt pumpkin pied. Kind of an interesting combination. So if you actually took this and you bred it to another pied, just a regular pied, half the offspring would be pumpkin pieds, the other half would be asphalt pieds. Kind of an interesting breeder. So this one is kind of the same thing. This is actually a highway pied. The highway and the Freeway are almost the same. They're just two different lines of the same thing. So essentially the highway pied is the gravel with the yellow belly instead of the asphalt and the yellow belly. It gets a little bit confusing, but I'd say there is slight differences between the highways and the freeways, and it really depends on what combinations you're going with. You can definitely tell there's a little bit of a different influence in this one. This one doesn't have the pastel, so it's a little hard to compare side by side, but it doesn't really have the strong stripe right down the top that you'd see in the other one. It's kind of interesting how it kind of fades it out a little bit. That some of these combinations are really unexpected when you actually produce them. So here is the Orange Dream. The Orange Dream works really well with the pumpkin pie. The Orange Dream is kind of an interesting gene. It really brings out a lot of the orange color in a lot of combinations. And the Orange Dream can kind of trick you. As a matter of fact, a lot of Orange Dreams are reduced almost to where they look like Enchi is in the mix. I'd say this one's not really reduced as much as a lot of Orange Dreams that I've seen. Usually they're really variable too. A lot of Orange Dreams can be really super bright, and then there's really kind of a browned out Orange Dream. And sometimes sometimes you'll pay like 10 times as much for a high intensity orange dream. It is pretty incredible. And kind of the other thing that can trick you with the orange dream, a lot of times they'll have tracks on the bottom that look like pied markers kind of along the belly, but usually with the orange dream, those pied markers continue just not in the tail, they continue all the way up the belly, sometimes the whole length of the snake. It's kind of an interesting appearance, and you really can't see it on this one. That's just like tracks on the belly. It almost looks like someone took a Sharpie and drew lines on either side of the belly between the white and the dark part along the belly. It's kind of an interesting effect. And here's what happens if you work orange dream into a pumpkin pie. Take a look at this. This is really an amazing combination. This makes it even more intense and really brings out a lot of the oranges in the snake. Pretty amazing. And I've seen a lot of orange dream yellow bellies that just really, they're just unbelievable. As a matter of fact, a lot of these snakes, it's almost hard to capture them on film, trying to, you know, get a photograph of them and put them up here on the internet. Some of them are just so incredible. And you kind of, the thing that these kind of remind me, almost looks like a koi fish if you're used to kois, between the really high bright colors and the white backgrounds. Kind of amazing. So here is the Enchi. The Enchi is kind of interesting when you mix it with pied. It has an unusual effect where it really gives you a low white pied in all cases. Usually if you have an Enchi pied, you have only just a little bit of white in the pied. And kind of the interesting thing with Enchi is usually when you mix it in with other combinations, it really reduces the pattern, and sometimes, you know, depending on the line of Enchi, you can have more or less pattern reduction. And usually with Enchi, it brings out a lot of orange in the combinations. So if you mix it in with other genes like the yellow belly in the pied, you can even bring out a brighter orange mixing in Enchi and getting a really low white pied. So take a look at this. This is what happens when you work Enchi into the pumpkin pied. This is a really unusual combination, and I've seen a lot of people working Enchi into pies, and it gives a really interesting effect. Sometimes you don't have almost, almost zero white on some of these Enchi pies with a lot of really bright colors in there, and sometimes you're just scratching your head, what are the genes in that snake? It makes some really mind-blowing combinations that you wouldn't really expect. And a lot of people actually prefer to go with the low white pieds because it gives a lot more color and pattern and really jumbles things up, really gives you an unexpected effect. So take a look at this. This is actually the Enchi with the pumpkin pied with the addition of orange dream. So this is kind of the ultimate potential of working Enchi into the pumpkin pied, layering orange dream on top to make a really super bright snake that has a lot of color. You know, sometimes if you actually stripped away the Enchi, potentially you could get a really high white pumpkin pied with the orange dream in there, and it would really take away from the effect of all the really bright and flashy colors. And the Enchi really gives you color on most of the snakes. Makes for a really interesting combination. So this is Pinstripe, and Pinstripe, when you actually work it into the pied, you'll actually get a pied with splotches of pinstripe color in the mix. I actually have a pinstripe pied, and essentially what it looks like is it looks like a pinstripe with splotches of white in the snake. And kind of the interesting thing with the pinstripe pieds is a lot of times it'll remove all the pattern in the snake, and you'll have kind of the goldish pinstripe color in a pied. It's almost completely with no pattern in the dark parts of the snake. Makes for a really amazing combination. And here's what happens if you work Pinstripe into this yellow belly pie. Take a look at this. As a matter of fact, this picture is kind of upside down. I don't know if you noticed that, but essentially what it does is it gives you a pinstripe pied with really bright yellows. It's kind of an interesting effect, and it seems like the yellow belly actually brings in a lot more pattern and pixelation in the pinstripe pied. Makes for a really interesting effect. And I really like the pinstripe pieds because, you know, it really brings out these solid colors, and then you add in the yellow belly and it really kind of jumbles it up, kind of darkens it just a little bit. Makes for a really interesting combination. So here's the last one I want to show you. This is a really unexpected effect working these genes into the pumpkin pied. This is actually the Super Pastel and the Enchi. The Super Pastel usually brings in a lot of high contrast, really jumbles up the pattern, and then you add Enchi to the Super Pastel and you get a really super bright snake. Makes a really amazing combination. And here's what happens if you work the Super Pastel Enchi into the pumpkin pied. Take a look at this. This is like nothing I've ever seen before. It's like, where did that that line come from on the back of the snake? And sometimes these combinations are so unexpected. And what I'm thinking is, every time I see the killer is essentially the super pastel. So I was looking over here, a lot of the super pastel yellow belly pieds. So it's a killer pumpkin pie is what it would be. A lot of them actually have this really strong line right down the top. And then the Enchi, essentially what that's doing, it's really reducing all the white part of the snake, bringing in a lot of the orange, gives you a really interesting effect. The killer Enchi yellow belly pied. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Raven Wolf asks, do you start out your ball python hatchlings on paper towels or on a regular substrate? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, at one point I actually tried paper towels and I found it's not really necessary. Essentially what I do is, as soon as my ball pythons are out of the egg, brand new hatchlings, I'll put them in my hatchling rack with some coconut husk. I actually use the Pro Coco coconut husk chips, and I just kind of break up a block in some water, and then I put the substrate in there, and it already has plenty of humidity in there for that coconut husk, and I haven't had any problems at all. And I pretty much wait until they shed out, and then I feed them live mouse hoppers. Pretty much the only thing they'll eat. As a matter of fact, I fed my first 6 ball pythons twice already, and they all ate the live mouse hoppers both times. And if you're actually feeding live mouse hoppers to your ball pythons, make sure that you take out the water, because those hoppers will actually drown in the water. That's one thing I learned early on. But other than that, yes, that's pretty much what I use. I just throw them right in the substrate. Nothing special for my ball python hatchlings. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.